Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're watching or listening to BoxBox F1 Pod. Welcome to the British Grand Prix Recap and Debrief. I'm so excited. I know it's been a minute since I've released an episode, but I had work travel for the last two races, and then I was on a trip for a friend's 30th. Literally got back last night, so I was able to watch the Grand Prix this morning. Loved every minute. What a weekend. What a weekend for England. What a weekend for F1 fans. What a weekend for Lewis Hamilton. And I can't wait to discuss it all in true British spirit since it's such a British weekend. I didn't have enough time since I just got back yesterday to prepare a meal to cook. So I am going to be just making a drink today, and it's going to be the Pimm's cup with a twist. I did see a recipe somewhere that had Pimm's and gin. So that's what I'm going to be making. I don't have half of the ingredients, so I don't know how it's going to work, and I also can't find the recipe I saw, so I'm actually going to kind of wing it, but it's going to be a Pimm's cup with twist. So before we get into the most British Grand Prix of all time, while sipping on the most British drink of all time, it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1, F1 news. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to discuss is the fact that Ollie Bierman has moved to Haas in 2025 for a multi-year contract. Very excited for him. Good place for him to start. Proud of him for making his debut earlier this year when Carlos had appendicitis and doing such a good job that he got signed to Haas. I guess that means we have only one Haas seat filled at the moment. In other news, Lance has extended his contract with Aston Martin, which some might say is not a shock at all. I personally think it's slightly shocking because I really thought that something was going to give this time around, and that whether Lance finally says he doesn't want to be here or Lawrence is like, look, enough's enough, don't know. But Lance is here to stay. I do want to say that I saw a very, very wholesome video of Lawrence entering the Silverstone paddock, and this little girl gives him a friendship bracelet with his name on it and the words like Aston Martin on it. And the way Lawrence handled it was so cute. He like stopped, talked to the girl. He's like, oh my God, can I put on the bracelet? This is so nice. He was so wholesome. So can't wait to see him as a grandpa. Because in case you weren't here for the last episode, Chloe Stroll and I forgot his name. The snowboarder Scotty James. Oh my God. Chloe Stroll and Scotty James are having a baby. Very exciting. So he's going to make an excellent grandpa, I think. And in other news, Pierre has extended his contract with Alpine. It's a multi-year contract. That's all we know. They're really backing one French horse. So we'll see how that goes, honestly. TBD. Honestly, Pierre's performance has not had a chance to shine, I think, because he's been with Esteban and he has had a shitty car. So maybe things are looking up. Who knows? They do have a lot of investors to impress. All right, moving on to F1 news / drama, Toto and the Verstappens. So first, Yas commented on all of this. There's speculation that Max might be moving. Toto keeps saying that, yeah, they will take him. And so Yas has said to the media, there's so much going on, so I don't want to say too much about it. And the interviewer said, so the Mercedes switch is not out of the question. And Yas says, correct. Now, Yas is just really hates Christian for some reason. Not really sure why or what Christian has done to deserve it, but Yas really, really, really hates Christian and really doesn't want Max around Christian for, again, whatever reason. But when Christian was asked about it, he said, if Toto wants a Verstappen, I think Yas is available. Lol. And Max said, I would rather not have all this, but I think I can always shield myself from these kinds of things once I'm in the car. It's also completely unnecessary. If you look at what it's about, it needs to be addressed better. So Max just thinks it's all dumb, as per usual, and I think he's kind of annoyed about his dad, but I don't know if he can tell his dad to like F off. I don't know what the relationship's like. He should though. So in other Merc news, whatever happens with that, I don't think Max is moving to Mercedes no matter how much his father thinks he has a say. But in other news, I think that I read that Mercedes is going to lose both the Tommy Hilfiger scholarship and the Puma scholarship once Lewis moves over. I do think that it is getting replaced by one single sponsorship. They are going to get Adidas, which is pretty good, but it is a blow to lose like a designer like Tommy Hilfiger, Puma, whatever. All right, lap 2, off-duty F1. Okay, so this was just a funny like interview thing that Alex, Lando, and George did all together. But I guess they were asked to describe each other as a flavor of ice cream, and Lando immediately points at George and goes, vanilla. And Alex was like, I was gonna say the same. I think you have to be pretty vanilla for Lando to call you vanilla, but I think that's accurate. Vanilla, I don't know what Lando's probably also vanilla, just like a different type, maybe vanilla bean. Because he's got, I don't know, they're both sassy. They're both pretty vanilla. The only one who's not vanilla is Alex. So Connor Sketches, who does all the impersonations of the drivers, did like a crossover with Love Island, as if all of them are in the villa, and it was like Lando and Max discussing their drama from last week, and then it was Christian pulling Max for a chat to discuss if he's going to move or not. Then it was Toto pulling Lewis. It was just so funny. I've linked it in the show notes, so please watch it if you have not already. Okay, so now I've put the strawberries in here and some simple syrup, and now I'm adding some Pims, and then I'm going to muddle it all together. Okay, so another thing that I've really loved is the Euros are going on right now, and it's been really funny to watch like the drivers interact with each other as their teams compete against each other. So we saw kind of an awkward forced interaction between Lando and Pierre to discuss France versus Netherlands. I don't know why it's awkward. They're friends and they both like football, but it felt a bit forced. I think maybe that's why they're like walking and they were like, talk about the Euros. So they did. Then we got a picture of Nico and Kevin watching Germany versus Denmark together and like having a beer, and it was very cute. More recently, Pierre posted a like dump called Date Night, and it was just him and Kika getting ready to watch France versus Portugal, which I also loved. And now, more excitingly, is that England is set to play against the Netherlands later this week, which, given that the English and Dutch drivers faced off each other this weekend, it's a very exciting prospect. And yeah, it's kind of fun to have other sporting events that they're all into happening at the same time, especially when it's like country based. All right. One thing I need to know is that it was 4th of July. It is 4th of July weekend. And there was a really funny clip, I'll link it in the show notes, of Logan doing some sort of podcast interview. I think it was for F1 or for Williams. And he asks them, I think it was Greg James from BBC One Radio, but he asks them if they know what weekend it is. And Greg James goes, of course we know what weekend it is. It's the British Grand Prix. And then Logan goes, no, it's 4th of July weekend. And then they played the like eagle cawing, eagle noises and the anthem. It was really funny. In an interview with Variety, I want to say, but Alex did an interview for one of his, I think it was for his clothing line that's coming out for his pets. And he was asked about the group chat. By the way, I am putting, again, my favorite gin ever into this called Engine Fuel the Dream. It's just the perfect melding of all F1. All right, so in this group chat, Alex says that there is an F1 group chat, but it is mostly business. He says it's 90% business and 10% memes. Then he also says that they like also complain in there if like the track bathrooms are bad, which made me giggle because is that business? Like, cause like we talk about safety and we talk about rules and we talk about like logistic stuff, but then we also complain about the bathrooms on track. He also did say there's a lot of side group chats, usually based on hobby or interest. So there's like a paddle group chat, there's a golf group chat, there's like a whatever group chat. And then the most interesting thing he said was that there is also a private jet carpooling group chat where they decide who's going to carpool with whom. And he was like, I don't know how it actually works because usually all of our managers are involved in figuring out those logistics. And he also used that moment to point out the fact that Lando was on his flight home and he was always supposed to be on his flight home, which means that the rumor that Lando had to switch his flight last minute to not fly with Max is not true, which good for him for pointing out. All right, moving on. Lap 3, triple header recap. So since I missed the last 2 races, I'm going to take a couple minutes to talk about them. For the Spanish Grand Prix, the only thing I really want to mention is the fact that that it had a Max Lando Hamilton podium, which really foreshadowed this weekend in particular. And one standout moment for me that I think also sort of set a precedent for the next few weeks is Lando in the post-race press conference, because in the race, at one point, Lando like really pushed Max off track. And in the post-race press conference, he gets asked about it. He's like, well, yeah, I left enough room for Max and for everyone. And both Max and Lewis burst out laughing. And Lando goes, what? I'm just going to stop talking. And then Max goes, I think for his birthday present, I'm going to get him a big mirror and some glasses, and then starts laughing. But then he sees Lando's not laughing. So he immediately pivots and he's like, these things happen. Like we always, in the moment, it always feels like we're leaving enough space and we're not. And I just think it shows how much Max respects his friendship with Lando, that he could see that he's uncomfortable with the jokes and immediately like pivoted. Okay, moving on to the Austrian Grand Prix. So there's actually a lot that I want to discuss here, so buckle up. First, Max and Lando. So I'm gonna attempt like a sort of play-by-play here, but Lando attempted an overtake on Max like 3 times. This was during their big battle that everyone was talking about for like a week. In my opinion, and I guess in Max's opinion, his attempts at the overtakes were not particularly fair. Lando basically dive bombed Max 3 times in a row, which is not fair racing in my opinion. And then Lando claims that Max was moving every time that he moved, which might be fair, but also I think that's called defensive driving. So I'm not really sure what rule in particular he was referring to, but it seemed like he was dive bombing Max and Max was defending his position. And then the last attempt, he basically dive bombed him again, attempting to overtake him. Neither would concede their position. Max kept like driving straight. Norris didn't back off. They had contact, which forced both of them off track, gave each of them a puncture, sent them both into pit stops where Lando decided to just retire. Like literally he's like, whatever, just retire the car, which made it sound like it was still salvageable. And he just decided that he didn't want to salvage it. And then Max rejoined and ended up finishing the race in P4, but with a penalty, it ended up being P5. So during the first 3 attempts at an overtake, sometime in those 3, I think Lando got a penalty for exceeding track limits because he had already gotten several warnings, which to me indicates that he wasn't faring particularly fairly considering he kept going off track to achieve whatever he was attempting to achieve. For the actual incident, Max got a 10-second penalty, which put him into P5 instead of P4 where he finished, which I found slightly unfair. Because, and it's not just me, because like the next week, all of the drivers were asked about it. Literally all of them, and basically every single one defended Max, saying like, just sounds like fair racing. This just sounds like a racing incident. Like, also, everyone knows what Max is like. Why are we surprised? Why are we confused? And I think that's where it comes down to it, right? Lando knows exactly who he's racing. Max always races fair. He pushes it to the very limit, but he races fair. In this particular case, on this 4th attempt to overtake, I would say he probably overstepped the line. But he had just been dive bombed 3 times. Like Lando was not racing fairly, and Max was probably agitated. It's like his little gnat that just won't go away. And he's like, just like back the fuck up. And like, he went a little too aggressive. Lando was being emotional and stubborn. Was like, no, I'm gonna overtake you. Blah, blah. And the result was this. Again, I think both drivers, like I'm not saying Lando's fully at fault. I'm not saying Max is fully at fault. I'm saying they're both at fault. I don't think it's fair for him to get that penalty. And I don't think it's fair to fully blame Max. So, and I especially don't think it's fair for everyone being like, see, it's the Max of old. Nothing has changed. I mean, that's like categorically untrue, right? Like Max has very much changed who he is. He not only is more mature on track and more level-headed, he also is very mature off track, which is indicated by the way they both responded to this situation. So after the race, Lando was literally whining the whole time. Like, I know emotions run high, but bro was very dramatic. He said all sorts of things. Like, if Max doesn't apologize, he'll lose so much respect for him. He doesn't know where their friendship stands at this point. Max doesn't really need this win, so why is he like racing so dangerously? And I think an interviewer asked Max the same thing, and Max was like, do you want me to just stay home? Like, I'm not here to race for P2. Like, why would Max do that? And Max, in his case, said that, like, look, we both raced hard. We both probably pushed the limit a little too much, but I need to go home and review the tapes because I can't comment without actually seeing things from an outside perspective. And then the interviewer said, well, Lando said that he'll lose respect for you if you don't apologize. And Max was like, well, I need to review the tapes to know what happened, to know like what I did and what he did and like what we both did on track to get to that situation, which I think is a very fair response. Lando was just being a petty little bitch. And I think it was exacerbated by the media because I think at one point, one of the interviewers was like, well, Max said that he's not going to apologize to you and shouldn't apologize to you. Max never said that. Max said he doesn't know what happened until he reviews the tape. He just didn't apologize to him in this moment. He never said he won't apologize or will, whatever. But Lando was being a giant baby, and he did admit as much once we came back to track in Silverstone. He was like, I was being dramatic. My emotions were high. All this is fair, but Lando does have a track record of this. And if he's going to be consistently fighting for wins and getting into scuffles like this on such a high level, he needs to learn to behave himself on camera. What I thought like made my heart like a little melt was that Max Verstappen said, the only thing I care about is, of course, maintaining my relationship with Lando because we are great friends. We immediately spoke on Monday. We like to race hard. That is what we like to do. And it is great for Formula One. And he also said he woke up Monday morning and immediately went to call Lando and saw that Lando had already texted him. I don't know if he's giving Lando more credit than he deserves, but I believe that Lando cooled off and was like, that was dumb of me. But like, again, it's just like the in the moment reactions, the same way that Max was acting back in the day. Lando wasn't competing on such a high level at that time. So he's like going through this evolution a bit later than Max, even though they're pretty much the same age, but like, you know, get a grip, Lando. Anyway, I just think it's really cute that Max, like, it's so important for Max to maintain his friendship with Lando, as we saw last week when he saw that Lando was upset about the joking, so he switched tactics. Same time this week, he's like, I don't think he's going to apologize unnecessarily. Maybe he did off camera. Lando said he doesn't think Max owes him an apology, so they probably resolved it without an apology because Max doesn't need to apologize. They were racing. Anyway, the other thing that happened during this race is the winner. So after Max and Lando slowed down post-contact, George just like flew past both of them, overtaking them both in one go, and was suddenly leading the Grand Prix. Just like out of nowhere. Completely unexpected. Immediately, total wolf, like I can imagine him just like tripping over things to get to the radio, and gets on. He's like, we can win this, George. We can win this. Just like over and over, he's just like yelling, and it's probably like surround sound in the helmet, and there's just like this loud German accent yelling at you, like, George, we can win this, George. We can win this. And George literally goes, can you go the fuck away? I'm racing. And it was so funny. They commented about it later. Toto's like, I've never done anything so stupid in my life, but I like got over excited. And George was like, I shouldn't have sworn, but like, bro, I'm trying to win a race here. I know I can win this. Go away. And it was very funny. But like, you can tell when George is truly stressed and panicked and swears, and when he's less stressed and panicked, because when he won the race, his response was yabba-dabba-doo. Only George. Also, one of my favorite moments was in the cool down room when they were watching the replays and they were showing the battle between Max and Lando, and George comments saying like, that was a cool battle, to be fair. And Oscar goes, well, yeah, you did just win because of it. Unhinged Oscar, best Oscar. Hinged Oscar, still best Oscar, but like 10 out of 10 commentary. All right, moving on. Lap 4, trackside at Silverstone. So one of my favorite moments from the weekend was Lewis and George were doing their like on-stage fan event. And I think it was happening right during, I hope someone planned it like this because 10 out of 10 planning. But it was during the England game and it was a penalty shootout. And so they turned on the game during the thing, and George and Lewis sat down to watch the penalty kicks with all of the fans that came out. I think Lewis had said at one point it's like 20,000 people were watching there with him. They saw England win the penalty shootout along with all those fans, and it was just erupted in cheers, and it was so exciting. They started playing It's Coming Home on the speakers, and George started singing along, of course, and it was just very exciting. And after the race, Lewis had actually said that this was the first time he got to watch football since he was a kid, like when he would go to pubs or something, but this is the first time in like years he's been able to watch football in like a group setting like this, and he was like, it was so exciting. In the post-qualifying press conference, they were asked why because it was top 3 all Brits, they were asked why British people are so good at F1, and Lewis said it's because of all the roasts. Lol. In terms of celebrities that were there, Brad Pitt was there. He was filming for the movie. I think it was extras because they've already released the trailer for it. And so I think it was just like extra footage. He stood with them for the national anthem. He had his own garage. He was doing like media pen interviews while they were doing their media pen interviews, which I actually really like, because it like really, it makes it seem a little more authentic if it's like filmed during the actual thing, not like they're all setting everyone up. They're just letting everyone do their own interviews and then they do Brad's, because obviously they can, edit out or like muffle the actual words that are coming from everyone else. So it's like really great. And you could hear like one of the actor playing the media interviewer shouting the character's name. And it's gonna be really cool. And I'm just very excited to see who cameos in the movie, because in the trailer, I think we saw Gunther Steiner like peering out like this, which was very exciting. I think Carlos must make it into the film with the walk across the grass with the 2 drivers in the movie. And then I think in the national anthem, Max Verstappen is going to be there. So that's exciting. Khaleesi was there. And literally the actress's name has flown out of my brain, but I adore her. She's so cute. She was very into it. She was visiting the Ferrari garage and very animatedly talking to Carlos and Charles about F1. It was very cute. And then McLaren also filmed a video of her walking towards the car and like stroking it like a dragon. It's great. Sir Brian May from Queen was apparently quite rude during the grid walk. I slept through the grid walk, oops. But he did wave the checkered flag, so that's exciting. Mr. Bean was there in the Mercedes garage looking very stressed. I think the commentator at one point said something, even Mr. Bean doesn't have a laugh in him right now. It was a bit of a jump scare to see Mr. Bean sitting there, but there he was. This wasn't on track, but I did see a video of Travis Kelce watching the race from a bar in Amsterdam with his friends. Literally, what a life he's living. Eras Tour by night, F1 by morning. Like, could you imagine a better life? You couldn't. You really couldn't. I could imagine a better life if, for example, the team I just invested a bunch of money in was actually finishing races and performing well. And not fighting, and had a good car. But I honestly probably, if I were him, would have watched in the privacy of my hotel room and cried. But there you have it. He was in a bar. I know that Patrick Mahomes was in town as well. I don't know if he was in the bar with him watching, but it was him and all his friends just watching Pierre DNF within 20 seconds. And finally, one of my favorite parts of the weekend was Hannah Waddingham, aka Rebecca from Ted Lasso, performed the national anthem. Stunning. Like, that woman can do no wrong. She's beautiful. She's perfect. She's got the voice of an angel, better than an angel, because it's just like the range on that woman. And then the planes flew above overhead. I don't know what the British version of Blue Angels. And Lando, George, and Lewis were standing up at the front because it's their home prix. And George, of course, was singing along, belting his little heart out, but he actually looked pretty like in awe of Hannah. I don't know if he was in awe of the anthem. I'm going to say he was in awe of Hannah. But there were no weird looks from the drivers because of flawless performance. And honestly, following Hans Zimmer in Austria, like that electric performance of the Austrian national anthem, it's been a win-win-win for anthems these days. Anyway, with that, we conclude the digital warm-up. On to the race rhyme. On Saturday, we watched George, Lewis, and a bunch of Brits watch the Three Lions win on penalty kicks. Then George, Lewis, and Lando were top 3 in quali. What a sporty week for the Brits. But the British triumphs don't stop there. On Sunday, the smell of winds and rain hung in the air. Rebecca from Ted Lasso sang God Save the King like an absolute pro. And Brad Pitt filmed some extra scenes for his movie called F1. Creative, I know. We love a bit of star power on the F1 grid, but when the lights went out on Sunday, even Hollywood couldn't write this script. Chaos erupted while the pit walls frantically refreshed the weather radar in case it might be time to put away the slicks. For the first 20-ish laps, the top 5 was various combinations of George, Lewis, Lando, Oscar, and Max. And while Max kind of seemed to be driving backwards, the others gave us some amazing attacks. When the second stint of rain seemed to be ready to hit, everyone pitted for intermediates, but McLaren decided to keep Oscar out because I think they might be idiots. By the way, due to a water systems issue, George was forced to retire, joining Pierre Gasly as 2 drivers with cars leaving much to be desired. Anyways, back to cars still on track. When the worst of the rain seemed to be over, teams had to make the best choice in tires and timing to avoid going slower. Max chose hards because he's smart like that, while Lewis went on softs because that's all he had. But McLaren decided to give Lando a choice between fresh mediums or losing the Grand Prix. So Lando went with softs because winning too often is overrated, you see. So with 10 laps to go, Max overtakes Lando into P2 and continues his climb. But no one should ever underestimate Lewis when it's hammer time. And finally, after 2 long years, Lewis Hamilton brings it home. So many tears were shed that if you listen carefully, you can probably hear Ferrari going, "Rain in the zone." Lewis Hamilton's win was basically perfection, and Logan's P11 for the 4th of July weekend had me going, God bless our troops, God bless America, and gentlemen, start your engines, because next is Hungary. Can't wait to see who's gonna win and who's gonna have tension. All right, next up, on to analysis. So quali, we had a top 3 British finish with George, Lewis, and Lando making up the top 3. George was clearly still on a high from last weekend. His little celebration with Carmen, his girlfriend, was so cute. I'll link it in the show notes. But there was one where there was the one with no sound over it. Is he like runs up, he picks her up and hugs her, and you can hear her going yabba dabba doo. It was very cute. Pierre Gasly had additional power unit elements. I heard he replaced the whole thing. The official F1 statement is additional power unit elements, but it cost him a 50-place grid penalty, so he will start at the back of the grid. But the memes for that were hilarious. Like, what is 50-place grid penalty? And it's like Pierre starting in France. It was funny. Checo's car was modified under park firm conditions, so he will have to start from the pit lane. Just going from worst to worst for him, isn't it? So the final starting grid is George, Lewis, Lando, Max, Oscar, Nico, Carlos Stroll, Lance Stroll, Alex Alonso, Leclerc, Sargent, Yuki, Guan Yu, Daniel, Bottas, Kevin, Ocon, Gasly, and then Checo starting from the pit lane. All right, on to the race. So the race start was pretty good for George. He had a better start than Lewis, so he kept his lead. Max overtook Lando right at the start, and the commentator goes, 1 Brit down, 2 to go. Mercedes said rain in 25 minutes. McLaren says it's coming in lap 6. Blah, blah. Who the hell knows? Classic F1 pit walls trying to figure out when the rain is coming, and no one getting it right. And then Gasly also DNF'd during this time. So I'm glad to see all those power unit changes went to a good cause. So in the first 20 laps, the top 5 seemed to change non-stop. Lando was chasing Max back down, and Lando ends up overtaking Max into P3. Lap 17, Oscar overtakes Max into P4. It was just very dramatic. Then Lewis overtakes George into P1. Lando is right on the tail of George and then overtakes him into P2. And then as like DRS is disabled because of the conditions, Lando overtakes Lewis into P1, and it was kind of incredible, and no one saw what happened. And now Oscar is chasing down Lewis. He has already overtaken George, and then he overtakes Lewis, and now it's a McLaren 1-2, and no one knows what happened. There was a moment where both Mercedes went wide, but there was no contact. It seemed kind of random. I guess it slowed them down enough for the McLarens to catch up, but it was very odd. So now it's a McLaren 1-2, but the commentator made very sure to say that Lando isn't thriving, but he is surviving. All right, so the main character, honestly, of today was the weather and the subsequent strategy that had to come from the changing weather. So during this section, the first 20-ish laps when all of this was happening, apparently we had our first stint of rain. I saw 1 drop on the camera at some point, and the drivers kept saying it was dry, but it wasn't apparently. But the prospect of the second stint was still looming. Everyone kept saying they'd survived the first stint. I didn't notice it was raining. But apparently it was. And the next stint was coming like laps 26 through 30. So for the tires, the strategy, so obviously the rain impacts the strategy for the tires. And to me, it makes it, this sort of rain makes things even more confusing because like, it's not really rain, but it's not like properly dry weather. So there were patches of time when regular tires were not going to work, but it almost wasn't ready for intermediates yet. And gauging the exact time when to switch between the two was like the biggest flex of all. Teams that could do it thrived, and the teams who couldn't struggled. Literally for the first 20 laps or so, though, all the drivers are saying it's too dry for inters, but the raters are saying it's raining, and but the drivers are saying this is not intermediate weather, and they like, it's just like very bizarre. And for the second stint of rain, timing is super important because there's the prospect of it potentially becoming stronger or going away. So being able to time it exactly is so important. But before the majority of our drivers ended up switching to inters, we did get a taste to see what the conditions, how the conditions would hold, how inters would hold up in the current conditions. And that was because both Checo and Charles got put on intermediates like 4-ish laps before everyone else. And it's very clear that it's like far too early. Like, and what's strange is I definitely heard Checo say it is too early for intermediates, and yet somehow 2 seconds later he's on intermediates. And Charles after the race was saying that like, I'll talk about Charles later, but Charles somehow always gets it wrong. And he's on intermediate so early, and it's clearly slowing him down. And like the commentators were like, it looks like Charles is competing in F1 in an F3 car. Oscar is claiming that it's still too early for inters, and it basically seems like he's right, although I'm starting to think that Oscar just hates intermediate tires. But like it almost, like he's currently chasing down Lando, and Carlos, who's also on mediums, is chasing down Max, and they both seem to be succeeding relatively well. I think in the post-race conference, Max described it as, and then for a moment, Carlos joined the party of him being like overtaken. It was funny. But by the next lap, both Max and Carlos end up coming for intermediates. I thought it was personally a little too early based on how Checo and Charles were performing, but I guess I just didn't understand something because it turned out not to be too early, because by the end of lap 28, everyone was on inters except for Oscar, who was leading the race. And the hilarious part is it seemed that everyone was still doubting their choice in switching to intermediates, because like Zach was like sticking his hand out, testing to see if it was actually raining or not, like debating which driver he had helped and which driver he had fucked. It was just like, it's just a really bizarre weather. So although Oscar was leading the race, it was just while everyone was pitting for inters, and then he ended up pitting at the end of lap 28 and came out 6th, which is like so annoying because it became clear that inters were in fact the best move at the beginning of that lap. And it also demonstrated how essential timing is, because he missed that period of time when he should have pitted, and because he wasn't brought in, he's 6th instead of leading now. So at this point, when everyone had just switched intermediates, the order at the top is Lando, Lewis, Max, George, Carlos, and Oscar. And in the words of the commentators, it's a day for the Brawleys, it's a day for the brave, and the British Grand Prix has thrown out an absolute corker. For my American listeners, Brawley is an umbrella, if you didn't know, and an absolute corker, I don't know how to describe that. Just like, whew. There's a corker. I don't know. Okay. So post-rain, the challenge now becomes, so the rain has passed basically, or is passing, whatever, if you could even call that rain. And now the challenge becomes finding the best time to switch off of inters to dry tires, and choosing the best tires to bring the drivers home to like finish the race. And some people chose better than others. But before we get into tire choice and strategy, George's DNF. So just as the rain was starting to clear up, George was told to box, and then he ended up having to retire the car for what we later found out was suspected water systems issues, not related to the rain. And George literally swore for real on the radio. Like they had to bleep him out. It wasn't like, oh, sugar, or like whatever other nonsense he usually comes up with, but like legitimate swear word. Really sad for him to retire for his home race, especially after a pole position and after his win last week. And like, he was really on a good trajectory to fight for a podium position, and for him to be out because of a technical issue that has absolutely nothing to do with his performance, really sucks. All right, so around lap 36 is when tires began to be switched. We do get told the rain is ending in 6 minutes, which is so obnoxiously precise. It's probably wrong, and it was. The commentators say it's very lightly pattering down now. I don't know where. I don't see the rain. The track looks dry to me. Maybe I'm blind. A couple of laps later, Max gets asked if he's okay to stay out, and he says, yes, he's fine for now. And GP says, that's fine. You're faster than the cars ahead. Oscar, on the other hand, gets asked around the same time if he's ready to switch to mediums, and he literally shouts, yes, mediums are best. He really hates intermediate tires. And I guess Max spoke too soon, because literally a lap later, everyone started coming in to switch tires, including Max. And here's where strategy calls became like infinitely more interesting. Keep in mind, there's about 20-ish laps left to go of the race. So you don't just have to choose the best tires for right now. You have to choose the best tires to get you through the next 20-ish laps. So McLaren had very smartly saved a set of mediums for both drivers, which Oscar immediately chooses. Lewis goes for softs, because I believe that's all they had available. Max goes for hards. And then there's Lando, who gets asked if he wants to go for softs, which would help him fight Lewis, is what they tell him, or mediums, which would help him fight Max. That's what he's told. First of all, they seem to be having this conversation. I don't know if the radio is delayed or the broadcast is delayed based on when Lando gets these radios, but it low-key sounds like he's driving through the pit lane and they're still trying to decide which tire to put on him. Like, they're still having a discussion as he's entering the pit lane. Second of all, there was some issue in the pit lane. I think Lando had to swerve around some mechanics, and the result was that he didn't brake in time into his box, so he basically had to be stopped by the front jackman. So his pit stop ends up being 4.5 seconds, and it really wasn't his crew's fault, the pit crew's fault. It might have been his fault, it might have been circumstantial, but regardless, he had a 4.5 second pit stop. And the worst of all of this is that Lando chose soft tires. Now, soft is a gamble given how much of the race is left, but also it's stupid because he had fresh mediums to choose and he did not. The commentators later said that they shouldn't have let him have a choice so far into this. Like, he's got other stuff to do, like drive the car. The decision should have been made for him. I also saw somewhere on Twitter that McLaren, like, now that they have a race-winning car, they need to get better at making strategy calls in the moment, and they're just not there yet. Like, their speed at strategizing impromptu has not really caught up with the development of their car, if that makes sense. So, like, they're left frantically trying to figure out which strategy to implement, and they should be much more decisive the way Red Bull was. And because of the delay in the pit lane, Lando, who had been leading the race, ends up coming out just behind Lewis in P2. Had he had a normal pit stop, he would have definitely come out still leading the race. But this was basically just the beginning of the end for Lando, who is now in P2. Lewis gets told that Lando's on the same tires as him, and Lewis says, leave me to it, mate. And then Max overtakes Lando into P2 with almost no problem, because hards was a brilliant strategy call from Red Bull and Max, and perhaps Lewis is a lot better at managing softs than Lando is. But at this point, we've got 10 laps left to go with Lewis leading and Max on much stronger tires gaining on him. And even though there's traffic and he's on such bad tires comparably to Max, he's still Lewis and he brings it home, and Max is just behind him by like 1 point something seconds. And it was one of the most wholesome moments from the whole season, probably the last 2 years, honestly. There was like a lot of build up to this moment. And we'll talk about Lewis's win in just a bit, but I wanted to wrap up the race portion. So let's focus on some of the specific strategies that we saw and what they resulted in. So Charles' strategy, inconsistencies with the car performance and general pace this whole weekend caused Charles to qualify P11, which already set him back for the race. Now, during the race, he had some pretty amazing overtakes, and it was kind of just a pleasure to watch him in his element, but that lasted about 3 minutes, because then for some unknown reason, he gets put on inters like way before it's time for inters, and that just like messes up his entire race. After the race, he said that given the rain and some of the turns that he was experiencing, plus the very like firm weather like prediction that he was getting from Ferrari, that like the rain was imminent, he felt that he had made the best choice, but clearly it wasn't, because they said the rain is coming now, and it came 10 laps later. So obviously he had like several laps driving on inters in dry conditions. Like, this is almost entirely Ferrari's fault, I think, rather than Charles's. But also, how is he still trusting their ability to read a weather radar? Like, they're by far the worst out of any pit wall. Like, just add 10 to any number they give you, literally, and you'd be fine. Anyway, that fully fucked him over. And I don't know if someone sold like the rest of this season for that one Monaco win, but like, I'm just not about it. Like, this is a disaster. Now, McLaren made several mistakes over the course of this race, the first of which was when they fucked over Oscar, who was leading the race quite spectacularly, I might add, and they decided to bring him to go on inters a couple of laps after, I think it was one lap, but it was like the end of the lap after everyone else did, and that fully screwed up his race. He went from leading in P1 to P6 really quick, and it was just a huge mistake. Perhaps, like, I think this error was what led McLaren to doubt themselves and resulted in the next error, which was letting Lando make a terrible tire decision. Maybe they they felt that they had made the call for Oscar and were wrong, so now they should listen to the driver, so they let Lando make the call, but like, it was too stressful to trust that to him, and they already knew the medium was the best choice for him. Like, why they would even offer him the softs is wild. Like, I just don't understand. When you have fresh mediums at your disposal with 20-ish laps to go, you don't put on softs. Like, you just don't. Now, Red Bull switching Checo to Inter so early was also pretty rude, but also he's doing so shit every race that like, he's just like a ready guinea pig for them to test any strategy on him before like implementing it in Max's race. Like, they can't make it worse, can they? Yeah, they put him on inters, but what really happened that was worse than what was happening already? Max, on the other hand, played things brilliantly, and if GP's choice of words are anything to go by, it sounds like most of the calls that were made were decided by Max. In the post-race, I think Max said that him and GP discussed everything in detail throughout the race, so it seems like it was a duo decision, but Max was involved every step of the way, like the switch to hards, when to pit, all that stuff. And having a great driver plus an excellent on-the-spot strategy, ability to call strategy on the spot like that is key when your car isn't performing to the best of its abilities, which is exactly the position that Red Bull is in right now. Like that, and that was really the biggest issue Max had today, was the car was just not that great. There was a point where he was like, it felt like he was literally driving backwards. So for him to finish in P2 when at one point it was looking like a P6 finish, P5 at best, is monumental work, and this definitely deserves a shout out. A couple of other highlights that I really want to talk about is that Nico finished 6th, which is amazing for Haas, and Alex finished 9th, which is great for him. But more importantly, Logan finished 11th. Like, happy 4th of July, am I right? I just want a hot dog real bad. What an incredible gift for all of us for the 4th of July weekend. But most importantly, I would like to take this moment to point out that this was not an American miracle, but it was the second week that Logan had the exact same car, I believe, as Alex. And last week, they both finished at the bottom, but they both finished. They were like 1 or 2 spots away from each other at the bottom. This time, they were still 1 or 2 spots away from each other, but Alex finished P9 and Logan finished P11. Like, the results speak for themselves, and it just makes me annoyed, because if he had been given this opportunity to like learn, grow, and compete in this car the entire season, I think we'd be looking at a very different future for Logan in F1. But alas, Williams is a broke bitch, and here we are. And finally, let's talk about Lewis. This is his first win since Saudi Arabia in 2021. That is 2.5 years later. At 39 years old, after a truly horrifying couple of years, I think he's finally back, and I think he's setting the tone for his Ferrari era. What Lewis went through was incredibly difficult, from an endless winning streak to feeling like your historical 8th World Championship win was snatched right out of your hands for like unfair reasons, to coming back to like the shittiest car possible, and the whole team's like morale is lower than like the deepest pockets of hell. Like, it's hard to thrive in that environment, but he's persevered, and he's shown that he's still Lewis, and he will continue to be Lewis Hamilton. And like, I know I have a tendency to like be a little dramatic in these situations, i.e. like when Carlos got his podium in Australia, I was like, he's going to be on the podium every week, and he's not. But I do think this is setting the precedent for what we're going to see from Lewis next year. I also think that George's win last week really helped the team to boost their morale. But like, I also think it's nice this week to win fully on merit and not like on accident. Not that I don't respect F1 wins like that like feed off of the misery of others. Like, that's like how the how the wheels of F1 turn. That's just how things happen. But like, that's still a win. A win's a win. But it's nice to see it be won on merit, you know, not because two drivers DNF'd in front of you and there you are on the finish line. And Lewis drove a 20 out of 10 race in a subpar car with tires that shouldn't have carried him like 20 plus laps, but they did. And so hats off to him. And for it to happen at Silverstone, I mean, you can't write this. Like you could, but no one would believe it was real. Like you could in fact write this. It just doesn't seem real. So post-race celebrations, speaking of not real, the raw emotion we felt from him after this race, the radios, like I literally cannot. Bono was shouting, "Get in there, Lewis, you the man, oh mate, I've been waiting for this." Lewis is sobbing, going, "Thanks so much, guys, it means a lot. Thank you to all the fans here." He's literally sobbing on the radio. Toto goes, "We will prevail." A little Nazi-ish from Toto, I'm not gonna lie. It just sounds a bit Nazi-ish, but well, it's okay. So George literally runs out to congratulate him from the paddock. I thought it was very cute. There's a random Aston Martin engineer in the crowd with all the Mercedes engineers. Not quite sure why, but he was there to welcome Lewis. Lando eventually comes over. Max congratulates him. The president of the FIA also congratulates him, and Lewis sort of swerves him. He has a really long hug with his father and then his mom, and he's clearly sobbing the whole time. And Charles gave him a thumbs up on track. You can see the drivers driving past him, congratulating him. And I will say one of my favorite stats is that Lewis has now set a new record of winning the most times on one track. So he's won 9 times on this track, which is the most of any other. I think he just surpassed Schumacher. The cool down room was low-key awkward, and I'm fully blaming Lando for this. He just like can't not be salty. I was like literally cackling as they're debriefing, and Lewis was like, "Oh, we stayed out for a lap too long." And Lando was like, "Yeah, we did." And then Lewis goes, "Wait, you switched to softs?" And Lando was like, "Yeah." And Lewis was like, "But you had a set of mediums." And Lando was like, "I know." And it was just really awkward. He was not there for the feedback. Awkward time for feedback, but just like accept it. The only thing that was missing from the celebrations is I didn't see Lewis and Toto celebrating together, because I really do think that relationship is fully ruined, but who knows? So the driver of the day was a very well-deserved Lewis Hamilton. I have no notes. He was the only driver of the day. I can't even think of a runner-up. The dick in the box for me is going to be Lando. Not that he necessarily did anything on track to warrant being called that, but he's literally such a whiny brat when things don't go his way that it's annoying me. It's like 3 weeks in a row now that he's throwing a fit post-race and he needs to pull it together. Okay, so the results for the British Grand Prix were Lewis, Max, Lando, Oscar, Carlos with the fastest lap of the race, Nico, Stroll, Alonso, Albon, Yuki, Logan, Kevin, Daniel, Charles, Bottas, Ocon, Perez, and Guan Yu, and George and Pierre DNF'd. The current standings are Max with 255 points, Lando with 171 points, Charles with 150, Carlos with 146, Oscar with 124, Checo with 118, George with 111, Lewis with 110, Fernando with 45, Lance with 23, and that rounds up the top 10. And the constructors are Red Bull with 373 points, Ferrari with 302, they're really catching up. McLaren with 295, Mercedes with 221, Aston with 68, RB with 31, Haas with 27, Alpine with 9, Williams with 4, and Kix Albert was still with 0. So that's it for the British Grand Prix. Next up is the Hungarian Grand Prix in just a couple of weeks' time. Honestly, the way the season is turning out, I actually can't wait, and I literally don't know how it's going to go. Make sure you subscribe and share with any potential boxes. Please leave a review if you can. It means a lot to me. And you can always DM me or email me with your thoughts. Love to hear from you guys, and it gives me good stuff to talk about in the next episode. And until then, make sure you follow at BoxBoxF1Pod on social to keep up in between races. See you soon. Box.